Time is a strange current. It washes away youth and fades memories, but it cannot erase the marks of sacrifice. Life teaches harsh lessons that sometimes the greatest gift we give can become our own burden. And in the folds of the past, truths are always hidden, truths people intentionally forget. This is such a true story about a woman who built an entire kingdom only to live like a beggar in her own territory. If you are listening from anywhere in the world, please leave a comment and subscribe, because there are truths that need to be spread, even if they might shake your beliefs. There are stories, no matter how painful, that must be told. The sun promised a hot day, already starting to draw long shadows on the concrete sidewalks. It was just after 6 inches the morning when Miss Hazel, a 6-year-old woman, moved with the slowness that age and exhaustion had imposed on her. Her gray hair, thin and sparse, was always gathered in a simple bun, tight at the nape of her neck, and her face, like a map of her life, was furrowed by decades of effort, of early mornings and restless nights. With an old, faded cloth that had once been a sheet, she carefully spread it on the sidewalk, right next to the house's fence, looking for a spot where the sunlight would hit directly to make her products look better. On that cloth, she arranged little treasures, delicate embroideries with floral motifs, kitchen towels with crocheted edges, and handmade rag dolls, each with a unique personality, button eyes, and smiles stitched with red thread. Each piece was the result of hours of silent work, of stitches made under the dim light of a table lamp, long after everyone else in the house had gone to sleep. Retired for years, Hazel barely survived on the little she earned from selling her crafts. Her Social Security check was a pittance, hardly enough to buy thread and fabric. Each stitch was a sigh, each thread a memory of a life of tireless work, of sacrifices made for her family. A life that now felt smaller, quieter, as if the world had forgotten her existence. Her hands, though gnarled by arthritis and with prominent veins, still retained the skill and delicacy to transform a piece of cloth into something beautiful, something she hoped would bring a little joy to whoever bought it, and in turn, allow her to buy a loaf of bread, a little milk, perhaps some fruit for Caleb. The street was slowly coming to life with the sound of the first cars and the chirping of birds. But for Hazel, the world felt increasingly lonely. After her husband's death 2 years ago, her only son, Stephen, had brought her to live with him and his wife, Jessica. "It's just until we get organized, Mom," he had said, a promise that dissolved as quickly as it was spoken. The temporary visit had become a permanent burden, an uncomfortable presence Jessica never bothered to hide. To Jessica, a woman who curated her life for social media as a conscious motherhood influencer, Hazel was an unsightly piece of old furniture. Her disdain was a suffocating air that filled the house, made of impatient sighs when Hazel moved too slowly and sharp words muttered just loud enough to be heard. "She's a nuisance," Jessica would say on the phone to her friends, "a stain in my living room with her smell of mothballs." Each word was a small, sharp knife, leaving wounds no one could see. The worst wounds, of course, are the ones that leave no visible mark. Little did Jessica know, each one of those invisible cuts was fueling a strength in Hazel she could never imagine. Stick with us to see when that quiet strength finally finds its voice. The 2 years in that house felt like 20. Time warped, stretching into an endless gray landscape of chores done in silence and meals eaten in solitude. The woman who had once managed a household, raised a son, and saved an entire nest egg now found her world shrunk to the size of the utility room. She learned the rhythm of the house, not as a member, but as a ghost, the creak of the floorboard to avoid, the precise moment to slip into the kitchen unseen, the hum of the washing machine that became her nightly lullaby. More than the sharp words, it was the crushing weight of her own invisibility that wore her down. Her existence became a collection of careful calculations. Thirsty in the middle of the night, she wouldn't just get a glass of water. She would wait, listening for the telltale silence that meant Stephen and Jessica were sound asleep. She would count to 100, then rise without a sound, her bare feet knowing the exact path on the cold floor that wouldn't betray her with a creak. The goal was simple, yet monumental. To quench her thirst without leaving a trace, without causing an impatient sigh from Jessica in the morning about someone wandering around all night. She had become a burglar in the very home she had built, stealing sips of water. She was a fading photograph in a house that refused to display her. There wasn't a single day that Hazel didn't feel the weight of that disdainful look, of those impatient sighs Jessica would let out when Hazel moved too slowly or made the slightest noise. The house, which she kept spotless, felt like a glass prison where she was seen but not acknowledged. One Tuesday afternoon, the Missouri sun streamed through the windows, illuminating the dust motes Hazel strove to eliminate. As she was folding clean laundry in the utility room, she heard shrill laughter coming from the living room. Jessica had invited her friends over for an influencer coffee meeting, a noisy gathering where they discussed fad diets, the number of Instagram followers, and the latest trends in athletic wear. Hazel tried to go unnoticed as always, moving as discreetly as possible. But Jessica's voice, sharp and condescending, stopped her in her tracks. "Oh, ladies, excuse the mess. It's just my mother-in-law, you know, her age. Sometimes she contaminates the atmosphere with her old things and her home remedies. But well, what can you do? She's family, right? You have to put up with it," Jessica said with a forced laugh, a laugh that sounded like a taunt, as if Hazel's presence were an inside joke, an inconvenience to be tolerated with resignation. Hazel felt a knot in her stomach, a burning sensation rising in her throat. She stood motionless with one of Caleb's t-shirts in her hands, feeling her cheeks flush with shame, an uncomfortable heat that made her wish she could disappear. Jessica's friends laughed, some with obvious discomfort, others with barely concealed mockery. Hazel heard everything, every word, every laugh, and forced herself not to react, to remain calm, to be, as always, the silent shadow that didn't get in the way. Her eyes filled with tears she refused to shed, pressing her lips together to keep from letting out a whimper of pain. It was a pain that went beyond humiliation. It was the pain of feeling like a burden, a nuisance in her own son's life. Stephen, her son, came home shortly after, in his DoorDash jacket and his gaze fixed on his phone, oblivious to the tension hanging in the air. He walked through the living room, greeted Jessica's friends with a vague gesture, and shut himself in his study, avoiding any possible confrontation, any look that might ask for an explanation or an intervention. His emotional absence was a different kind of poison from Jessica's sharp cruelty. It was the slow, seeping ache of abandonment. In his averted gaze, she saw the ghost of the boy she had raised, the boy for whom she had worked her fingers raw. She remembered teaching him to stand up for others, to be a man of integrity. Now, that man was a stranger who chose peace with his wife over justice for his mother. She knew he wasn't cruel by nature. He was weak, a ship without an anchor, terrified of the storm that was Jessica. But his weakness was not an excuse. It was a choice he made every single day. Each time he walked past her without a word after Jessica had made a cruel remark, his silence screamed a betrayal louder than any insult. It was the silence that said, "My comfort is more important than your pain." That night, as Hazel prepared a simple dinner for Caleb, a bowl of mac and cheese, a humble dish she knew he loved, the boy approached her with a small paper flower he had made at school. His eyes, large and full of an innocence that contrasted brutally with the coldness of the house, shone with an affection that was the only ray of light for Hazel. "Grandma, this is for you. It's a friendship flower, so you won't be sad," said Caleb, handing her the small gift with his tiny, paint-stained hands. Hazel felt a shiver of tenderness run through her body, a warmth that reached her heart. It was the only genuine gesture of affection she received in that house, a balm for her wounded soul. She stroked Caleb's head and kissed his forehead, feeling the boy's soft hair under her fingers. "Thank you, my love. It's the most beautiful flower I've seen in a long time," she whispered, and tucked the flower into her apron pocket like a priceless treasure, a little gem worth more than all the gold in the world. Jessica complained about everything. The noise Hazel made when she walked, the smell of her old embroidery which, according to her, stunk up the house, her slowness in doing things, that she was always in the way. "Hazel, can't you hurry up? It's like you're moving in slow motion, always in the middle of everything," she would sometimes yell, regardless of whether Caleb was nearby, whether he heard the cruelty in her voice. Hazel took refuge in her work, in her embroidery, in the stories Caleb asked for. They were her only escapes, her small moments of peace in a sea of contempt. The silent oppression had become the air she breathed, a constant that slowly wore her down, day after day, stitch after stitch. But beneath that apparent fragility, under that layer of meekness, Hazel held a silent strength, a dignity that refused to be broken, a resilience that no one suspected, a force that, though no one knew it yet, was about to manifest in the most unexpected way, like a dormant volcano about to awaken. The heat of a summer day in Street Louis was suffocating, sticky, a heavy blanket that settled over the city. The air vibrated with the constant hum of air conditioners working at full blast and the distant murmur of incessant traffic on the highways. Hazel had spent the morning looking after Caleb, playing with him in the small backyard, telling him stories of her youth and what life was like in the country, far from the city's hustle and bustle. Meanwhile, Jessica was at a photo shoot for a sportswear brand, posting stories on her social media about her healthy and active lifestyle. Hazel felt the sun beat down on the back of her neck, a relentless pressure that mirrored the one in her chest. Each step on the hot pavement was an effort. It wasn't just the heat that tired her. It was a deeper exhaustion, a weariness of the soul from constantly trying to be smaller, quieter, less of a burden. She clutched the canvas bag not just out of habit, but as if it were an anchor to the woman. She used to be a woman of purpose, a woman who built things. The thought of facing Jessica's inevitable disappointment over any small mistake made her stomach clench. It was a familiar dread, a poison she had learned to swallow daily. Before leaving, Jessica had asked Hazel to pick up an important package from the post office a few blocks from the house, a package that, according to her, couldn't wait. Hazel, with her slow but steady pace, had walked under the scorching sun, the weight of the canvas bag with her embroidery under her arm, as always, a habit that gave her security. The sun burned her skin, and the asphalt sizzled under her worn sandals. However, upon arriving at the post office, after waiting in a long line under a fan that barely moved the air, she realized she had forgotten the ID needed to pick up the package. Her mind, tired from the heat, the daily grind, and constant worries, had played a trick on her. A cold sweat ran down her back. She returned home with a heavy heart, already feeling the weight of the reaction that awaited her, the fear of Jessica's fury. Each step back was heavier than the last. The house seemed to await her with a dense atmosphere, charged with a tension that could be cut with a knife. Jessica met her at the door with a look of contained fury, her eyes shining with an anger Hazel knew well. "Where's the package, Hazel? I asked you for it hours ago. Do you know how important it was?" She snapped, her voice a sharp whip lashing the air. Hazel, her voice trembling, tried to explain, her throat dry. "I'm sorry, dear. I forgot my ID. I'll go back later, I promise." But Jessica didn't let her finish. Her patience, already thin, had completely run out. Hazel's words were lost in the air as Jessica approached, her face contorted with rage. "You're useless, always ruining everything, a nuisance. You're good for nothing," she screamed, and without thinking, without a hint of remorse in her eyes, without a shred of consideration for the old woman's age or fragility, she pushed Hazel in the middle of the sidewalk. The push was unexpected, rough, filled with disproportionate force. Hazel lost her balance instantly. Her feet tangled, and she fell, sitting hard on the hot concrete, feeling a sharp pain in her hip that wrung a moan from her. Her old canvas bag, which she always carried, slid a bit, but she clutched it with instinctual force, as if her life depended on it, as if that bag were the only thing she had left in the world. Inside, besides her embroidery, were the documents she guarded like a secret, a treasure no one else knew about. The impact was a dull thud that echoed in the momentary silence following Jessica's shout. A neighbor, Mrs. Patricia, a middle-aged woman with curly hair and a kind look who was watering the plants in her front yard, witnessed the scene. Her jaw dropped in astonishment, and her eyes widened. She saw the push, heard the screams, and Jessica's icy tone as she exclaimed with chilling cruelty, "Get out of the way, you nuisance. You're good for nothing." Indignation boiled in her blood, a righteous anger that spurred her to act. Without hesitation, she pulled out her phone and started recording. She captured the moment Hazel fell, her expression of pain and shame, the impassive coldness on Jessica's face, who didn't even flinch. The video was raw, real, unfiltered, and showed cruelty in its most blatant form. A scene that was repeated in many homes but was rarely seen by the world. In so many homes, these moments of cruelty happen behind closed doors, lost to the silence. But this time, a witness was watching, and a single recording was about to turn Hazel's private suffering into a public outcry. You won't believe how fast this fire spreads. Mrs. Patricia, with her heart aching with helplessness and rage, uploaded the video to her social media with a simple yet powerful caption that resonated with the collective conscience. This is how they treat a grandmother who only wanted to help. This is abuse. The video spread like wildfire on a windy day. Within hours, the likes and comments multiplied by the thousands, then hundreds of thousands. The outrage was unanimous, a chorus of voices rising against the injustice. Thousands of people commented, expressing their revulsion at the daughter-in-law's coldness, sharing their own stories of abuse or mistreated elderly. Messages of support for Hazel flooded the post, transforming her into a symbol. But what really caused a commotion, what touched people's most sensitive chords, what made the video go viral, was Hazel's look in the video. A mix of deep pain, unbearable shame, and a silence that spoke volumes. The silence of someone who has carried a secret for a long time, a sadness that transcended the humiliation of the moment. The image of the old woman sitting on the ground, clinging to her faded bag, became a symbol of the fragility and dignity of the elderly, of the vulnerability of those who have given so much and received so little. People didn't just see a push. They saw years of silent abuse, of contempt, of a life of invisibility. The video became a silent scream that resonated in the hearts of thousands, a call for justice that no one expected, a spark that would ignite a personal revolution for Hazel. And Hazel, without knowing it, had become the face of an injustice that was about to be revealed to the entire world. A face that refused to be forgotten. The images of Mrs. Hazel sitting on the hot sidewalk, clinging to her faded bag while Jessica yelled contemptuously, "Get out of the way, you nuisance," flooded every screen, every phone, every television tuned to the local news. The comments overflowed like a swollen river. How barbaric. Poor grandma. This is elder abuse. We can't allow this. Justice for Hazel. That woman is a monster. Thousands of people shared the video, reposted it, tagged their friends, elderly aid organizations, news channels, anyone who could do something. The outrage was unanimous, a clamor that echoed on every screen, in every message, a collective cry demanding a response. Hazel, initially unaware of the magnitude of what was happening because she rarely used her old phone, began to feel the pressure. Her device, which she barely used for calls, wouldn't stop vibrating with messages from neighbors and acquaintances asking if she was okay, offering help, sending her strength. She, with her discreet nature and shame at the exposure, felt overwhelmed, as if a giant spotlight had suddenly been pointed at her. The shame was a heavy cloak covering her, thicker than any wool blanket. It wasn't the shame of being pushed, not of falling in public, but that her life, her silent humiliation, her long-held pain, was now exposed to the eyes of the whole world. She hid in the utility room, her usual lonely corner, wishing the earth would swallow her, that the floor would open up and engulf her. She didn't want anyone to see her or pity her. She just wanted everything to go back to the way it was, even if that before was a life of invisibility and suffering. But the world was no longer the same. Reporters started knocking on the door of the house, their microphones and cameras aimed at the entrance, their flashes blinding. The street, once quiet and familiar, filled with onlookers, news vans, people stopping to stare. Jessica, at first, was defiant, with a forced smile on her face, denying everything in front of the cameras, saying it was a misunderstanding, a social media exaggeration. But the pressure from social media and public opinion was relentless, like a hammer striking without pause. Her image as a fitness and conscious motherhood influencer was crumbling to pieces like a sandcastle washed away by the tide. Sponsors began to withdraw their support. Hateful messages filled her profiles. Her followers dwindled by the minute, desperate to clean up her own image, to save what was left of her public life. Jessica turned to Hazel with a cold fury, a contained rage that made her tremble. "You have to fix this, you old woman. Because of you, my career is going down the drain. My life is ruined," she yelled one afternoon, dragging her almost by force into the living room, where she had set up a makeshift recording studio with her phone, lights, and a white backdrop. "You're going to record a video with me. You're going to say it was all a misunderstanding, that you tripped, that I was helping you up. Right now, Hazel. Don't make me waste any more time." Jessica's voice was a command, not a request, a veiled threat. Hazel looked at her, her eyes tired but firm, with a spark of dignity that refused to be extinguished. She had endured years of contempt, of silences, of exclusions, of feeling less than nothing. But to lie, to deny the truth of what had happened, that was something her dignity, her very essence, would not allow. Caleb, the little boy, was hiding behind the sofa, his eyes wide, watching the scene with his heart pounding, his face reflecting fear and confusion. Jessica put the phone in her hand with the camera recording, the lens pointed directly at Hazel's face. "Say something, Hazel. Say it was an accident. Say you love me, that everything is fine between us," she demanded, her voice tense, on the verge of collapse, almost pleading. Hazel looked at the camera, a cold, impersonal object, then at Jessica, her daughter-in-law, with a look that said everything, and finally at the floor, where her old, tired feet rested. Her hands trembled, but not from fear, but from a decision that was forming deep in her heart. A decision that would change everything. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with air, and with a voice that, though trembling with emotion and weakness, was clear, audible, and full of undeniable truth, she said, "I just wanted to keep being useful. But now I understand." She said no more. She didn't accuse Jessica. She didn't complain about the years of mistreatment. She didn't apologize for anything. Just those few words, laden with a painful resignation, with a deep understanding of her place in that house and in that family. The tension in the air could be cut with a knife. It was that thick. Jessica looked at her, stunned. Her plan was shattered in an instant, her face pale. Stephen, who had appeared in the doorway of the living room, drawn by the shouts, stood motionless, not knowing what to do. His face was a mixture of shame and cowardice, unable to look his mother in the eye. Hazel, with the same calmness with which she had arrived at that house 2 years ago, stood up from the sofa. She didn't make a scene, she didn't scream, she didn't cry, she didn't create drama. She simply went to the utility room, her small refuge, picked up her faded canvas bag, the same one that had fallen with her on the sidewalk, tucked it under her arm like a treasure, and walked to the front door. Each step was a silent declaration of her decision, an act of liberation. Jessica tried to stop her, reached out a hand, but the words got stuck in her throat, unable to make a sound. Stephen, for the first time, looked up, but made no move to stop his mother, paralyzed by guilt or indecision. Caleb came out from his hiding place, his eyes full of tears, and for a moment Hazel thought about hugging him, about staying for him, for her little grandson, but she knew she couldn't. She couldn't go on living in a place where her dignity was trampled daily, where she was a shadow, a nuisance. The door closed behind her with a soft click, a sound that marked the end of an era and the beginning of another. The afternoon sun was already setting, dyeing the sky in oranges and purples. And Hazel, with her bag under her arm, walked away from the house that had been her silent prison, without looking back. Her destination was uncertain, but the feeling of freedom, though painful, was immense. A weight lifted from her shoulders. With nothing but a canvas bag and her own dignity, Hazel walked into an unknown future. Sometimes, the most terrifying step is also the most liberating one, but what she was carrying in that bag was more powerful than any home she left behind. Let's find out what her secret is. The video of her statement also went viral, but this time with a different force, one that moved mountains and inspired many. The night swallowed the last light of dusk as Hazel walked away from the house, each step an act of severing an invisible chain. She found a small, run-down motel where the neon sign flickered like a dying heartbeat. The room she paid for with her craft money smelled of stale smoke and disinfectant. The wallpaper was peeling, and the single bulb cast a sickly yellow light. To anyone else, it was a place of despair. To Hazel, it was a palace. She locked the door, and the sound of the bolt sliding into place was the most beautiful sound she had heard in years. Leaning against it, she closed her eyes. There were no floorboards to avoid, no sighs to anticipate, no presence to tiptoe around. The oppressive air of judgment was gone. Here, in this broken-down room, she could finally breathe. For the first time in 2 years, she was alone, but she was not lonely. She was gloriously, terrifyingly, and completely free. She walked through streets she knew by heart, every corner, every tree. But now they felt strange, alien, as if she had never seen them before. The night air was cool, a relief after the suffocating heat of the day, but loneliness enveloped her like an icy cloak, chilling her to the bone. She had no fixed destination, only an urgent need to get away from that place where her soul had shriveled, where her spirit had been oppressed. Her canvas bag, the same one that had fallen with her on the sidewalk, was her only companion, her only luggage, a light but meaningful weight. After eating, with a deep sigh, Hazel untied the knot of her canvas bag. Her hands trembled as she took out her neatly folded embroideries. Underneath them, carefully wrapped in a kitchen towel she had stitched with colorful flowers, were the documents. They were old papers, yellowed and soft at the creases, but they were the secret ledger of her life. The property purchase agreement from 10 years ago, the mortgage payment stubs, the bank slips, each one was a ghost of a past sacrifice. She remembered the callous skin on her fingers from extra sewing jobs, the ache in her back from cleaning other people's homes. She had poured her youth and her dreams into these papers. The house was legally in Stephen's name, a gift she and her husband had insisted upon, a foundation for the future they wanted for him. "So it will be truly yours," she had told him, her heart swelling with a mother's pride. She never imagined that the foundation she built for her son would become the ceiling of her own prison. It's a devastating irony, the ultimate act of a mother's love, twisted into a weapon against her. These yellowed papers weren't just proof of ownership, they were a record of her entire life's sacrifice. But a stack of old papers is one thing, winning a fight against your own family is another, and the real battle is about to begin. They were irrefutable proof that the house where she had lived for the last 2 years, where she had been treated like a nuisance, where Jessica humiliated her daily, that house had actually been bought by her with the sweat of her brow and the effort of her hands. She remembered every detail, every sacrifice she had made to get those papers. The nights sewing until dawn, her fingers sore, her eyes tired and red from lack of sleep, the days working as a seamstress in a clothing factory, and in the afternoons cleaning other people's houses, washing dishes, ironing clothes to earn extra money she jealously saved. She had saved every cent with zeal, with a clear purpose, with a dream in mind, to give her son a future, a home of his own, a safe place to grow up. She and her husband had dreamed of that house, of seeing Stephen grow up in a safe place with a roof of his own. When her husband became seriously ill, the dream became more urgent, more necessary. She had worked twice as hard, 3 times as hard, to save for the down payment and the first mortgage payments. "We'll put it in your name, son, so you won't have any problems down the road, so it will be truly yours," she had told a young Stephen, full of dreams and promises, naive about life. She never imagined that this act of love, this show of blind trust, would be used against her, that the house she had built with the sweat of her brow would become her own prison, the stage for her humiliation. The memories flooded her, sweet and bitter at the same time, like a mixture of honey and vinegar. The joy of seeing Stephen enter his house for the first time, the excitement of painting the walls, of planting a small garden in the backyard. And now all of that had vanished, replaced by the bitterness of contempt, by the feeling of having been betrayed. She lay on the bed, the documents spread around her like a map of her life, of her past and present. The physical ailments added to the emotional distress, the pain in her hip from the fall, the weariness in her bones, the uncertainty of tomorrow that loomed over her. But at the same time, a small spark of hope ignited in her chest, a faint but persistent flame. Those papers, her long-kept secret, were her only defense, her only voice, the irrefutable proof of her truth. It was proof that she was not a burden, that she was not useless, that her life had had a purpose, an incalculable value. She closed her eyes, clinging to the canvas bag as if it were a life raft in the middle of a raging sea. The noise from the street filtered through the window, the sound of cars and sirens, but Hazel no longer heard it. Her mind was on the past, on the uncertain future, and on the small spark of dignity she had managed to keep alive despite everything. She knew the road ahead would not be easy, that Jessica would not stand idly by, that the fight would be hard. But for the first time in a long time, Hazel felt she had something to fight for, something to defend. Those documents were not just old papers. They were her history, her effort, her entire life. And now it was time for the world to know the truth, for her voice to be heard. The night wore on, and Hazel, in the solitude of her motel room, dreamed of a home, a real home, where she could live in peace, with the dignity she had earned with every stitch, every drop of sweat, every sacrifice. The bread from Caleb had given her the strength to start believing that a new dawn was possible, that justice, however late, could come. Miles away, in a modern minimalist apartment in downtown Street, Louis, overlooking the twinkling lights of the skyscrapers, Erin, a young lawyer in her early 30s, was eating dinner alone in front of her tablet. She'd had an exhausting day at the office, dealing with complex contracts, tense negotiations, and demanding clients who tested her patience. Her life was a whirlwind of work, ambition, and the pursuit of justice, a passion that had led her to study law and dedicate herself to defending the most vulnerable. While eating a quick salad, she scrolled through the news and social media, a habit to disconnect from the day's stress and stay on top of what was happening in the world. Suddenly, a short, raw video caught her attention, interrupting her dinner. It was the video of Mrs. Hazel. Erin watched it over and over, feeling indignation rise in her chest, hot and bitter. The image of the old woman on the ground, the daughter-in-law's impassive coldness, the words "get out of the way," "you nuisance" echoed in her mind, seared into her memory. But what struck her most was Hazel's look, a mixture of pain, shame, and deep resignation, but also a hint of something more, something that Erin, with her legal instincts and experience in difficult cases, couldn't quite decipher, a mystery that drew her in. That night, Erin couldn't sleep. The image of Hazel haunted her, replaying in her mind over and over. She had seen many cases of abuse, defended many victims, but this one had something different, something that touched her on a personal level, that moved her deeply. The story of the old woman who left her home with just a canvas bag, without making a scene, without screaming, without crying, intrigued her profoundly. Why did she leave like that? What secret was she guarding in that faded bag? Erin felt there was something more, an untold story, a deeper injustice than what the video showed on the surface. She decided she couldn't stand idly by. Her conscience wouldn't allow it. The next day, first thing in the morning, before heading to her office, she began to investigate. She searched for the viral video, read the thousands of comments, and contacted Mrs. Patricia, the neighbor who had recorded it and posted it online. Mrs. Patricia, moved by the lawyer's interest, gave her Hazel's full name and the address of her son's house. Erin went there, but the house was locked, or at least no one answered her persistent knocks. Neighbors told her that Hazel had left, that they didn't know where she was, that she had disappeared without a trace. Erin didn't give up. Her determination was ironclad, unbreakable, like a rock. She spent days searching, asking in nearby neighborhoods, at churches, at community centers for the elderly, at shelters, at soup kitchens. She knew Hazel couldn't have gone far, with so little money and no family to support her. The search was difficult, frustrating at times, with many closed doors and few clues, but Erin had an unyielding persistence, a faith that she would find her. Finally, after nearly a week of tireless searching, when she was beginning to lose hope, a worker at a homeless shelter gave her a lead. An elderly woman matching Hazel's description had asked about cheap boarding houses in the downtown area, a place where the neediest sought refuge. Erin followed the lead and, with difficulty, going door to door, managed to find her in a modest, almost hidden boarding house in a narrow, noisy alley. The place was old and loud, with a stale air, but Hazel was there, sitting on the edge of her bed, sewing a small rag doll, her face absorbed in the task. When Erin introduced herself, Hazel looked at her with suspicion, her eyes narrowed. She had learned not to trust strangers, especially not someone so young, well-dressed, and with an air of authority like Erin. "What do you want? Are you here to bother me?" Hazel asked in a rough voice, hoarse from disuse, her tired eyes fixed on the lawyer, as if trying to read her intentions. Erin, aware of the old woman's distrust, sat calmly on a wooden chair, maintaining a respectful distance, not invading her space. "My name is Erin Taylor. I'm an attorney. I saw your video, Mrs. Hazel, and it moved me very much. I want to help you, if you'll let me." "Free of charge, I swear," Erin explained in a soft, sincere voice, trying to convey her honesty. Hazel watched her in silence, weighing her words, her gaze scrutinizing. There was something in Erin's eyes, an honesty, a compassion that reminded her of her own husband, a spark of kindness she hadn't seen in a long time. Slowly, with distrust still in her eyes, Hazel began to tell her story, a story she had kept silent for years. She started from the beginning, from her husband's death, how Stephen had brought her to live with him and Jessica, the empty promise of a temporary stay. She spoke of the invisibility, the silences, the daily humiliations, how Jessica treated her like a nuisance, like a stain in her house. Her voice was low, sometimes broken by emotion, by painful memories, but every word carried weight, a truth she had held for too long, that she was now releasing. Erin listened attentively, her heart aching with every detail, feeling Hazel's pain as if it were her own. She could feel Hazel's pain, the injustice of her situation, the cruelty she had been a victim of. When Hazel got to the moment of the push, her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't shed them. She swallowed them with the same dignity she had shown in the video. "I just wanted to be useful, but I understood then that to them I was a burden, a nuisance," she said, and Erin felt a deep compassion, a contained rage. It was then that Hazel, with a slow, deliberate gesture, untied the knot of her canvas bag. With trembling hands, she unfolded an embroidered kitchen towel to reveal a stack of yellowed documents. "This is the truth," she said, her voice barely a whisper as she handed the papers to the lawyer. "My entire life is in those papers. I bought that house with the sweat of my brow. I just wanted my son to have a future. I never thought he'd use it to take mine away." Erin's eyes widened as she examined the contents. Receipts, contracts, payment stubs, it was all there. It was the irrefutable evidence of her truth, the story of a life of effort and a mother's love betrayed in the cruelest way. As Erin carefully placed the documents back into her briefcase, her professional composure momentarily faltered. In Hazel's tired eyes, she saw the ghost of her own grandmother, a woman who had also faded into the background of a bustling family, her stories dismissed as ramblings and her presence taken for granted. Erin remembered the profound guilt she felt after her grandmother passed, the regret of not having listened more closely, of not having fought for her dignity against the subtle dismissals of others. This case was no longer just a pro bono matter of justice. It was a pilgrimage. It was a chance to fight the battle she had failed to fight years ago, a debt she felt she owed to a memory. In helping Hazel reclaim her voice, Erin hoped to finally silence the whispers of her own past regrets. Erin reviewed the documents with intense concentration, her legal mind analyzing every detail. They were authentic. The evidence was irrefutable. The injustice was even greater than she had imagined. A painful betrayal. Tears welled up in Erin's eyes, not of sadness, but of a mixture of rage and profound determination. "Mrs. Hazel," Erin said, her voice firm and full of conviction, her eyes filled with promise. "You have rights, and I am going to help you get them back. You are not alone. We are going to get justice. I promise you." Hazel looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, a small hope ignited in her tired eyes, a dim but persistent light. She had found an ally, a voice that would fight for her, a hand extended in the darkness. This is the moment the fight truly begins. For the first time in years, Hazel isn't alone, but hope is a fragile thing. A legal battle is a war of its own, and they have no idea the lengths Jessica and her lawyers will go to protect a life built on lies. With Hazel's documents in her hands, Erin didn't waste a minute. The old woman's story, her sacrifice, and the cruel betrayal by her own family had moved her to her very core. It wasn't just a legal case, it was a personal mission, a fight for dignity and justice. The next day, first thing in the morning, Erin appeared at the St. Louis County Courthouse with a stack of papers under her arm and an unbreakable determination in her eyes. She initiated the legal process. a lawsuit to recognize Hazel's legitimate ownership of the property, despite the deed being in Stephen's name. She knew it would be an uphill battle, that the legal path would be long and complicated, but she was prepared for it. She presented the bank receipts, the purchase agreements, testimonies from former neighbors who remembered Hazel working tirelessly to pay for the house. Each document was a piece of the puzzle, irrefutable proof of Hazel's truth. The news of the lawsuit soon reached Jessica's ears. The press, which had already been following the case since the viral video, became even more interested. Reporters, who had previously only sought the drama of the push, now saw a deeper story, a legal battle for a house, for the dignity of an old woman. The cameras and microphones reappeared in front of Stephen and Jessica's house, this time with more incisive questions, with a more serious tone. Jessica, at first, was indignant, her face contorted with fury. "This is insane. That old woman is senile, she's making things up. The house is ours, Stephen's and mine. This is a personal attack, a media lynching," she shouted at reporters, trying to deflect the attention, trying to present herself as the victim of a conspiracy. But her words sounded hollow, empty, lacking the conviction she used to have. Stephen, as usual, stayed on the sidelines, hiding in his study, avoiding eye contact with his mother and the media. His inaction was a constant weight for Hazel, a wound that wouldn't close. Aaron tried to contact him, sent him legal notices, tried to talk to him to make him understand the gravity of the situation, to see his mother's truth. But Stephen refused to respond. He hid behind Jessica, letting her handle the situation, unable to face reality, unable to defend his own mother. His cowardice was palpable, a silence that screamed louder than any words. Hazel, upon learning of Jessica's reaction and Stephen's inaction, felt a chill. Despite having Aaron on her side and the evidence in her hands, fear crept in. "What if they don't believe me, Miss Taylor? What if they say I'm crazy, that I'm making it all up? She has money, she has a lawyer, she has connections. What if people forget about me? What if no one supports me?" Hazel asked, her voice trembling, her eyes full of an old insecurity, a fear of not being heard, of not being believed. Aaron, with the calm and conviction that characterized her, took Hazel's hand. "Mrs. Hazel, you have the truth on your side, and you have the documents, and you have many people who support you, who have seen your video and are outraged by what they did to you. You are not alone. We are going to fight, and we are going to win. I promise you," Aaron said, trying to instill confidence in the old woman. The lawyer knew that Jessica would not stand idly by. The daughter-in-law, with her public image at stake, with her sponsors withdrawing their support, with her influencer life crumbling, would not hesitate to counterattack with all her might. And so she did. Jessica, desperate, hired an aggressive lawyer well known in media circles, a man who had no scruples about using dirty tactics to win his cases. His strategy was clear: discredit Hazel, present her as a senile, confused old woman seeking attention and money. Jessica's lawyer began giving interviews, posting messages on social media, spreading rumors about Hazel's mental health, about her supposed senile dementia. "It's a smear campaign, Mrs. Hazel. They want people to doubt your testimony, to think you're not in your right mind," Aaron explained to Hazel, trying to prepare her for what was coming, for the media war that loomed. That evening, Aaron sat with Hazel in the small boarding house room, the glow of her tablet casting long shadows on the wall. "I need to show you this, Hazel," she said gently, "so you are prepared." On the screen were comments from strangers, a torrent of cruelty. "Attention-seeking old hag. Probably a liar just trying to get money. My grandma gets confused too, she's senile." The words were just pixels on a screen, but they landed like physical blows. Hazel looked at the screen, her hands, which could create such beauty from a simple thread, trembled slightly. She had faced poverty, exhaustion, and loneliness. But this was a different kind of cruelty, impersonal, vast, and deeply invasive. She looked away from the tablet and at her own hands, at the wrinkles and veins that told the true story of her life. "They don't know me," she whispered, more to herself than to Aaron. "They don't know anything at all." But Hazel, despite her fear, felt a spark of anger. She would not let them trample on her again, make her out to be crazy. She had fought her whole life and was not going to give up now. The legal battle was shaping up to be a confrontation not only in the courts but also in the public arena, where public opinion would play a crucial role. The press, hungry for drama, would follow every step of the process, every statement, every move by the lawyers. Hazel, though scared, held on to Aaron's hand, to the promise of justice. She knew the road would be difficult, that Jessica's lies and slander would hurt her. But she also knew she had the truth on her side, and that was the most important thing. The injustice she had lived with in silence for years was now coming to light, and with it, the opportunity to reclaim not only her house, but also her voice, her dignity, her place in the world. The first step was taken. The legal machinery was in motion. And though fear still accompanied her, the hope of a better life, of a life in peace, was a light guiding her in the darkness. Hazel's fight for justice was just beginning, and the whole world would be a witness. Jessica, feeling cornered and with her public reputation crumbling to pieces, decided to launch a fierce counterattack, a smear campaign on social media aimed at flipping the narrative and turning herself into the victim. Her lawyer, a man with a cold gaze and a calculated smile, advised her every step of the way. "We have to strike first, Jessica. We need to divert the attention. People are fickle, and if we give them a new story, they'll forget the old one," he told her with a self-assured voice. So, Jessica, with her lawyer's support, began posting messages on her profiles, lamenting being the victim of an unjust online mob. "I am being harassed. My family is under attack because of a false story. I am a mother, a wife, a hard-working woman, and they are destroying me out of envy," she wrote, accompanying her posts with photos of herself with a sorrowful expression, trying to generate pity and empathy. Jessica's strategy was clear: to sow doubt about Hazel's credibility. She claimed the old woman was senile, that her memories were confused, and that she was only seeking fame and money at her family's expense. The media, always hungry for controversy, began to give space to Jessica's version, creating a public debate about the truth of the case. Some internet users, influenced by the campaign, began to doubt, to question Hazel's story. Could the grandma be lying? What if this is a scheme to get money? Could be read in the comments. And Hazel, learning of this from Aaron, felt a sharp pain in her chest, an old wound reopening. Jessica's lawyer, an expert in manipulating public opinion, appeared on television and radio shows, presenting his client as an innocent, persecuted woman, and Hazel as a confused and manipulated old woman. But Jessica's cruelty didn't stop there. Her plan included a key piece: Caleb, Hazel's young grandson. She knew that the image of a child could be very powerful, very manipulable. She tried to manipulate him, spoke ill of his grandmother, told him Hazel was mean, that she wanted to take their house, that she had abandoned her family. "Caleb, your grandma left because she doesn't love us. She's mean, right? She wants to hurt us," Jessica would whisper, trying to plant the seed of hatred in the child's heart. She wanted Caleb to record a video, to say in front of the camera that his grandmother was a liar or that she made things up. The emotional pressure on the child was immense, a weight a 6-year-old should not have to bear. However, Caleb, despite his young age, was an intelligent and sensitive boy. He remembered the affectionate moments with his grandmother, the stories she told him, the cookies they shared in secret. He remembered Hazel's sweetness, her patience, her unconditional love, and he also remembered the fear in his grandmother's eyes, the sadness he saw in her every day. Caleb's childlike purity was a shield against his mother's lies. He resisted Jessica's manipulations. He refused to speak ill of his grandmother. "My grandma is good, Mommy. She's not mean," he would tell Jessica with an innocence that exasperated his mother. Jessica, frustrated, would scold him, yell at him. But Caleb stood firm, clinging to the truth in his heart. There is no poison stronger than a mother's lies, but there is no shield stronger than a child's pure love. Jessica thought she was creating a weapon, but in her cruelty, she completely underestimated the one person who saw the truth most clearly. She had no idea that her own son was about to become her downfall. The emotional pressure on Hazel grew daily. The hateful messages on social media, the accusations of senility, The idea that her own grandson could be manipulated against her, all of it, affected her deeply. Aaron tried to protect her, kept her away from the cruelest news. But Hazel, despite everything, found out about things, about the rumors, about the lies being told about her. Why so much evil, Miss Taylor? Why can't they just accept the truth? Hazel would ask, her tired eyes reflecting sadness and helplessness. Aaron would explain that it was a tactic, that Jessica was desperate, that she had no other way to defend herself. She reminded Hazel that the truth always comes to light, that justice, though slow, would arrive. Meanwhile, Caleb, oblivious to the complexities of the legal and media world but aware of the injustice his grandmother was experiencing, was keeping a secret, a little treasure that could change the course of the battle, a secret he had recorded months before, unaware of the importance it would have. Jessica's hate campaign, far from weakening Hazel, was unwittingly setting the stage for an even greater revelation, one that would come from the most unexpected and pure source. The tension in the air was palpable, the battle was intensifying, and Hazel, despite her fear, clung to hope, to Aaron's promise, to the faith that the truth would ultimately prevail. Hazel's dignity, though under attack, remained intact, like a flame that refused to be extinguished. While Jessica's smear campaign spread like an oil slick across social media, trying to tarnish Hazel's good name, little Caleb, oblivious to the complexities of the legal world and the malice of adults, was keeping a secret he had been hiding for months, a little treasure that, unbeknownst to him, had the power to change the course of the battle. Caleb, at just 6 years old, was an observant child with a sensitivity that allowed him to see beyond appearances. He had noticed the sadness in his grandmother's eyes, the silent tears that sometimes escaped when she thought no one was watching. He had felt the tension in the house, his mother's whispers, and his father's coldness toward Hazel. And above all, he remembered the moments of affection, the stories his grandmother told him before bed, the cookies they shared in secret. Those memories were like an anchor in his little heart, keeping him steady against Jessica's manipulations. Jessica, in her desperation to control the narrative, had tried and continued to try to manipulate Caleb. She told him his grandmother was mean, that she wanted to take their house, that she had abandoned her family. Caleb, your grandma left because she doesn't love us. She's mean, right? She wants to hurt us. She wants to leave us homeless. Jessica would whisper in a voice that tried to sound sweet, but which Caleb felt was cold and fake. She would show him videos on her phone so he could see the negative comments about Hazel, trying to plant the seed of hatred and distrust in his heart. But the boy, with the purity of his innocence, resisted. His grandmother wasn't mean. His grandmother was the one who read him stories, who gave him tight hugs, who taught him how to draw and make little knots with colorful threads, who smelled like freshly baked bread and lavender, who smiled at him with her eyes. Months before the push, on a rainy afternoon when Caleb was bored and his mother was busy on her phone, the boy had found his grandmother's old cell phone, an old model that Hazel barely used for calls. Curious, Caleb had started exploring the device's functions. He had discovered the camera and, without much thought, had recorded his grandmother. Hazel, sitting in her corner of the utility room, her embroidery hoop in her hands, was telling him one of her favorite stories. The story of how she had saved every penny to buy the house. Look, my love, we bought this house with a lot of hard work, with a lot of love. Your grandpa and I worked day and night, me sewing, him in construction. Every coin we earned, we saved in this little box, Hazel had said, pointing to an imaginary box as her eyes shone with the emotion of the memory. And so, little by little, we saved up for the down payment, and then for the payments. This house is the fruit of our labor, of our dreams. We did it for your dad, so he would have a safe place to grow up, so it would be truly his. Caleb, with the innocence of a child, had recorded the entire conversation. The camera was a bit shaky, the footage homemade and wobbly, but his grandmother's voice was clear, full of emotion and truth. The hum of the washing machine could be heard in the background, along with the soft sound of Hazel's needles as she embroidered. The boy had saved the video on the phone without thinking much of it at the time. It was just another memory of his grandmother. But now, with his mother's lies echoing in his ears, with the image of his grandmother sad and alone, that video had taken on a new meaning. It was the truth, his grandmother's truth. and Caleb felt he had to protect it, that he had to show it. Hazel's old phone, which she had left at the house when she departed, was hidden by Caleb in a secret place, under his bed, inside a shoebox filled with his favorite toys. It was his most precious treasure, not because of the phone's value, but because of what it contained. Caleb had tried, in his own way, to find Aaron. He had heard the lawyer's name in his parents' conversations, on the news they watched on TV. He knew she was helping his grandmother. One day, while Jessica was distracted with an important call, Caleb took a piece of paper and a colored pencil. With his childish handwriting, he drew his grandmother sitting in the utility room with her embroidery hoop and wrote a phrase he had heard many times from Hazel. "My grandma is good. She bought the house." It was a simple but powerful message, the truth told from the heart of a child. Caleb knew he had to find Aaron. He didn't know how, but the need to help his grandmother was stronger than his fear. The emotional pressure at home was unbearable for him. He saw his mother getting more and more nervous, more irritable, and his father more absent, more withdrawn into himself. The atmosphere was dense, heavy, filled with lies and uncomfortable silences. The boy, with his intuition, felt that something big was about to happen, that his grandmother's truth needed to come out, that he couldn't stay silent. Caleb's childlike purity would become the key, the missing piece in the puzzle of justice. His little secret, guarded so carefully, was about to be revealed, and with it, the hope that the truth would finally prevail. The countdown to the trial had begun, and Caleb, unbeknownst to anyone, was preparing to be the most unexpected and moving witness. The day of the trial arrived, bringing with it a tense atmosphere that could be felt in every corner of the room. The air conditioning barely managed to dissipate the heat of anticipation. The courtroom was packed with people, reporters with their cameras and recorders, curious onlookers who had followed the case on social media, and some members of elderly support organizations who had come to show their solidarity with Hazel. The flashes of cameras lit up the room whenever someone important entered or left. In the center of the room, the two parties faced each other, separated by an invisible barrier of resentment and accusations. On one side, Jessica, impeccably dressed in an elegant suit, her hair perfectly styled, sat next to her lawyer, a heavy-set man in an expensive suit with a calculating gaze, known for his aggressiveness in court. Jessica looked confident, almost arrogant, with a cold smile that didn't reach her eyes, as if she already knew victory was hers. On the other side, Mrs. Hazel sat next to Aaron, her young lawyer. Hazel wore a simple fabric dress, her hands clasped in her lap, her eyes tired but firm. Despite the intimidating atmosphere and Jessica's presence, Hazel maintained a silent dignity, a strength that emanated from within her. Aaron, with her sharp gaze and determined posture, whispered words of encouragement to her, reminding her that she was not alone, that the truth was on her side. The judge, a middle-aged man with glasses and a serious expression, banged his gavel, calling for silence, and the hearing began. The murmur in the room died down, leaving only the sound of reporters' pens and the faint hum of cameras. Jessica's lawyer was the first to speak. His deep, resonant voice filled the room. He began his argument by discrediting Hazel, presenting her as a confused, senile old woman whose memories were the product of old age and fantasy. "Your Honor, Mrs. Hazel, with all due respect, is an elderly person. Her memories are, unfortunately, confused. She believes she bought the house, but the reality is that the property has always been in the name of my client, Mr. Stephen, and his wife, Mrs. Jessica. There is not enough evidence to prove otherwise. This is a desperate attempt by an old woman to get attention, to gain a financial benefit from her own son." The lawyer argued with an eloquence that tried to sound convincing, but to Hazel, it sounded like a blatant lie. He showed documents, copies of deeds, and records that, on the surface, seemed to support his version. Hazel listened to every word, feeling her blood boil, but she forced herself to remain calm, not to react. Aaron, by her side, gave her a reassuring smile, indicating it was her turn. The young lawyer stood up. Her voice was clear and firm, full of conviction. "Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Hazel, is not a confused old woman. She is a woman who has worked her entire life, who has sacrificed everything for her family, and who now seeks justice. We have irrefutable proof that the money for the purchase of that property, the effort behind every payment, came from Mrs. Hazel. We will present bank receipts, testimonies from people who saw her work tirelessly, and documents that prove the true history of that house," Aaron said with a passion that contrasted with the coldness of the opposing lawyer. She showed the documents Hazel had so carefully kept in her bag, the yellowed receipts, the contracts that proved her effort. Aaron's defense was methodical, detailed, presenting each piece of evidence with a clarity that left no room for doubt. She spoke of Hazel's life, of her years as a seamstress, as a cleaner, of the craft fairs where she sold her embroidery. She painted a picture of a hard-working, honest woman who had given everything for her son. Hazel, her voice thick with emotion but with unwavering dignity, was called to testify. She sat on the witness stand, her hands still trembling, but her gaze fixed on the judge. "I just want the truth to be known, Your Honor. That house is my life. I bought it with my hands, with my sweat. I gave it to my son out of love, so he would have a future. I never thought they would do this to me," Hazel said. Her voice, though quiet, resonated in the room, charged with an emotion that moved many of those present. She didn't directly accuse Jessica. She didn't complain. She just told her story, the truth from her heart. In a courtroom, the truth can often get lost in a sea of legal jargon and clever arguments. Hazel offered no grand speeches, only the simple, heartbreaking truth of a mother's life. The question is, in a battle like this, is the truth enough? Jessica's lawyer approached her like a wolf circling its prey, his questions dripping with condescension. "Are you sure of these memories, Mrs. Hazel? Or is it possible that time has embellished the story for you?" He leaned in, his voice a low, suggestive whisper. For a moment, the weight of the courtroom, the disbelieving eyes, threatened to crush her. But then she pictured Caleb's face. She thought of the little paper flower he had given her, a symbol of a truth he knew instinctively. Her spine straightened. She looked not at the lawyer, but directly at the judge, her voice no longer trembling. "You don't forget the feeling of calluses on your fingers from sewing until 2 a.m. You don't forget the ache in your back from scrubbing other people's floors. You don't forget it because it's not just a memory, it's a map etched onto your body. I didn't just buy that house with money, sir. I bought it with my life. And I remember every single second of it." The hearing was a duel of words, of truths and lies, of contained emotions and veiled accusations. Jessica, sitting in her chair, looked at Hazel with a mixture of contempt and nervousness, her initial confidence beginning to crack. Stephen, for his part, remained silent, his gaze lowered, unable to lift it and face his mother's truth. The emotional pressure on Hazel was growing, but her dignity, her truth, was her shield. The trial of silence, as the press would call it, was far from over, and Hazel's truth, though defended with a trembling voice, was breaking through the lies, seeking its way to the light. The courtroom was a stage, and Hazel, unintentionally, had become the protagonist of a story of justice that was about to take an unexpected turn. The hearing continued, dense and charged with tension, with the lawyer's arguments echoing in the room and Hazel's truth struggling to break through the lies. Jessica, sitting next to her lawyer, maintained an expression of false calm, though inside, worry was beginning to gnaw at her. The solidity of the evidence presented by Aaron, while not definitive, was starting to unnerve her. The judge listened attentively, his face impassive, weighing each testimony, each document. The atmosphere was one of tense silence, broken only by the voices of the lawyers and the occasional murmur of those present. Hazel, despite her fatigue and the pressure, remained steadfast, her gaze fixed on the judge, hoping her truth would be recognized. Suddenly, a murmur spread through the room, a whisper that quickly grew into an audible buzz. The courtroom door opened slowly, and all eyes turned towards it. There, standing in the doorway, was a small, familiar figure. Caleb, Hazel's grandson, came hand in hand with Aaron, who had found him in the courthouse hallways after the boy, with a determination unusual for his age, managed to get to the building by asking for his grandmother and the lawyer defending her. Caleb held in his hands, clutched against his chest, a folded piece of paper, a drawing. His face, though serious, reflected a mixture of innocence and deep conviction. The reporters, always ready for drama, began to whisper, their cameras ready to capture the moment. Jessica, upon seeing her son enter with Aaron, felt a chill of panic. Her eyes widened, and her face turned pale. "Caleb, what are you doing here?" "Go home," she exclaimed, her voice sharp and full of nervousness, trying to make the boy leave, to keep him from approaching, from saying anything. But Caleb, with the innocence only a child can possess, ignored his mother's words. His eyes searched for his grandmother, and upon seeing her, a faint smile appeared on his face. He walked directly towards the stand where Hazel was, with Aaron by her side. The judge, surprised by the interruption but intrigued by the boy's presence, called for silence with a soft rap of his gavel. "What is the meaning of this, counselor?" the judge asked, his voice serious but with a hint of curiosity. Aaron, with a calmness that belied the surprise of the moment, approached the bench. "Your Honor, this is Caleb, Mrs. Hazel's grandson. He has something to show you, something that may be relevant to this case," she explained in a respectful but firm voice. The judge nodded, and Caleb, with his small, trembling hands, unfolded the paper he was carrying. It was a drawing made with colored pencils, with childish but clear strokes. On the paper was the figure of an old woman sitting in what appeared to be a utility room with an embroidery hoop in her hands. And below the drawing, written in large, uneven letters, as only a 6-year-old can write, was a phrase, "My grandma is good. She bought the house." A deathly silence fell over the room. The drawing, so simple and so pure, struck a chord in the hearts of everyone present. The judge took the drawing in his hands, his eyes tracing the childish lines and the innocently written words. A deep emotion was reflected on his face, a glimpse of humanity rarely seen in a courtroom. He called for silence again, this time in a softer, almost reverent tone. The innocence of Caleb's statement, the undeniable truth emanating from that simple drawing, broke through the cynicism of the hearing, the coldness of the legal arguments. It was the voice of truth, unfiltered, unmanipulated, a truth that came from a child's heart. In a room full of legal arguments and calculated lies, the purest truth came from the hand of a child. That simple drawing did more damage to Jessica's case than any lawyer could, but Caleb wasn't done yet. His biggest secret was still to come. Jessica, upon seeing the drawing, upon hearing her own son's words, lost control, her face contorted. The mask of confidence shattered into 1,000 pieces. "That's a lie, Caleb. Don't be ridiculous." "She's manipulating you," she screamed, rising from her seat, her voice filled with desperation and rage. Jessica's lawyer tried to calm her, but she was beside herself. The truth, spoken by her own son, was a devastating blow to her strategy. Stephen, who until that moment had kept his gaze lowered, lifted his head and looked at his son, then at his mother, and finally at Jessica. His face was a mixture of shame, guilt, and deep sadness. Caleb's drawing wasn't just evidence, it was a mirror reflecting his wife's cruelty and his own cowardice. Hazel, seeing her grandson's drawing, felt her heart swell with love and pride. The tears she had held back for so long flowed from her eyes, but this time they were tears of gratitude, of relief. Her little Caleb, her only ray of light in that house, had spoken for her. He had revealed the truth in the purest and most moving way. The judge, visibly moved, looked at Caleb with unusual tenderness. "Thank you, Caleb. Your drawing is very valuable," he said, his voice soft. The innocence of childhood had achieved what legal arguments sometimes could not: touch the heart of justice. The courtroom, which had been a battlefield of words, had transformed into a space of emotion and truth. Jessica, in her desperation, tried to keep screaming, but her lawyer held her back, trying to control her. Caleb's revelation had been an unexpected blow, a dramatic turn that no one had anticipated. But Caleb's surprise wasn't over. The boy, with a determined look, approached Aaron and whispered something in her ear, pointing to the old cell phone the lawyer was carrying in her bag. An even greater secret was about to be revealed, proof that would seal the fate of the house and Hazel's dignity. The purity of a child had opened the door to the truth, and justice was about to be served. The air in the courtroom was still thick enough to cut with a knife after Caleb's interruption. The drawing, so simple yet so devastating in its innocence, had left Jessica trembling with rage and Stephen petrified in his seat. The judge, with a furrowed brow, had called for a brief recess, a moment for everyone to absorb the weight of what had just happened. Jessica, her face red and her breath ragged, tried to get up, but her lawyer held her firmly, whispering words of calm that she couldn't hear. She was beside herself, her castle of lies crumbling before everyone's eyes. It was in that moment of confusion, as the murmur of the onlookers began to rise, that Erin remembered the little secret Caleb had entrusted to her. The boy, with his large eyes full of unusual determination for his age, had approached her amidst the chaos and, pointing to the bag where Erin kept her belongings, had whispered something about an old phone and a video of his grandma. Erin, with a jolt of hope running through her, reached into her bag and pulled out the device. It was an old cell phone, the kind almost no one uses anymore, with a slightly worn case and a few scratches on the screen, but one that Hazel had kept for years, without much thought, until Caleb had taken it for his games. With trembling fingers, Erin turned on the phone. The screen lit up, showing a wallpaper with a photo of a smiling Caleb. The boy, still close to Erin, pointed with his small finger to where she could find what he was talking about. "Here, lawyer. Here's what my grandma told me," Caleb said in a low voice, with the seriousness of an adult. Erin navigated through the folders until she found the videos. And there it was, a file dated several months before Hazel's ordeal became public. The thumbnail showed Hazel sitting in her corner of the utility room with her embroidery hoop in her hands, just as Caleb had drawn her. Without wasting a second, Erin connected the old cell phone to a projector in the courtroom. The lights dimmed, and Hazel's image appeared on the giant screen, filling the space with her presence. An absolute silence fell over the room. Hazel's voice, a little younger in the video but with the same sweetness and firmness, began to resonate, clear and crisp. "Look, my love, we bought this house with a lot of hard work," Hazel said in the video, addressing Caleb, who could be seen in the corner of the screen asking questions. "Your grandpa and I worked day and night, me sewing until the early morning, him in construction, putting up walls under the Sunday. Every coin we earned, every cent, we saved in this little wooden box you see here. It was a piggy bank we made ourselves. And so, little by little, we saved up for the down payment and then for the monthly payments. It was years of tightening our belts, of not buying anything that wasn't essential, of dreaming of this little piece of land. This house is the fruit of our labor, of our biggest dreams. We did it for your dad, so he would have a safe place to grow up, so it would be truly his, so he would never lack a roof over his head." Hazel's voice cracked a little as she recalled the sacrifices, but it remained firm, filled with the truth of a dedicated life. The gentle hum of the washing machine could be heard in the background, the rhythmic sound of the needles embroidering, and the childish voice of Caleb, asking curious questions about how houses were built and how money was saved. It was the definitive proof, Hazel's voice from the past, confirming every word of her testimony. She was not a senile old woman. It was not a confused memory. It was the pure truth recorded by the innocence of a child, an irrefutable testament to love and sacrifice. Erin, seeing the reaction in the room, felt a lump in her throat. She knew she held the key to Hazel's justice. The reporters, with their cameras and notebooks, were recording and writing frantically, their eyes fixed on the screen. The people in the room, many of them elderly who identified with Hazel's story, held their breath, some with tears in their eyes. The emotion was palpable. The truth was breaking through with unstoppable force. Jessica, seeing the video, hearing Hazel's voice, felt her world collapse. Her face, previously pale, turned red with fury and shame. Her eyes widened, and her breathing became rapid and shallow. The mask of sophistication and confidence crumbled completely, revealing the desperation consuming her. She tried to stand up, to scream, but the words stuck in her throat. An uncontrollable tremor ran through her body, and her legs gave out. She fell to her knees on the floor, letting out a choked sob, a sound of defeat and desperation that echoed in the silent room. Her lawyer, surprised by her reaction, tried to help her, but Jessica was in her own hell, facing the harsh reality of her exposed lies, her public image shattered. Stephen, who until that moment had remained in a complicit silence, with his gaze lowered, unable to face his mother, finally lifted his head. He saw the video, heard Hazel's voice, every word of sacrifice and unconditional love, and then he saw Jessica collapse on the floor. The truth, so painful and so clear, hit him with the force of lightning. The tears he had suppressed for years finally flowed not of anger, but of a deep, burning shame. He cried silently, head bowed, crushed by the weight of his own inaction. Caleb's video had not only revealed the truth about the house, it had exposed the full depth of his cowardice. And there it is, the undeniable truth, recorded by a child, that shatters every lie Jessica has built. In this moment, a family's ugly secrets are laid bare for the entire world to see, leading to a verdict that will change all of their lives forever. Stay with us for the judge's final decision. The courtroom, which had been a stage for lies, was now witness to the relentless victory of truth. Justice was finally about to be served, and Hazel, with silent tears in her eyes, felt the weight of dignity return to her heart. A dignity that had been stolen from her and that now, thanks to a small video and the innocence of her grandson, was hers again. Jessica's collapse and Stephen's silent weeping had left an indelible mark on the courtroom. Caleb's video had been the final blow, the irrefutable proof that completely dismantled the defense's narrative. The judge, with a solemn expression, observed the chaos that had erupted. He called for order with a firm strike of his gavel, and the room slowly regained a tense silence, broken only by Jessica's choked sobs and the murmur of reporters, who captured every detail of the judicial drama with their cameras and recorders. Jessica's lawyer, his face distorted and his voice trembling, tried to argue something about the validity of the evidence, but his words sounded hollow, unconvincing, like a distant echo no one wanted to hear. The truth had spoken, and no legal argument could contradict it. The judge, after a moment of deep reflection, cleared his throat and began to read his verdict. His voice, previously neutral and distant, now had a tone of firmness and conviction that filled the room. After reviewing all the evidence presented, including the documents proving the origin of the funds, the testimonies of those who witnessed Mrs. Hazel's efforts, and crucially, the audio-visual material provided by the minor, Caleb, this court has reached an undeniable and irrefutable conclusion, the judge began, his gaze fixed on Hazel. The old woman, sitting upright despite her fragility, listened with her heart pounding, barely daring to breathe. Beside her, Erin held her hand, squeezing gently to give her strength and convey her unconditional support. It has been proven, beyond a reasonable doubt, that the funds used for the acquisition of the property in dispute, located at the address on record, as well as for its maintenance and improvement over the years, came exclusively from the arduous work and sacrifice of Mrs. Hazel. Although the property was registered in the name of Mr. Stephen, son of the plaintiff, the de facto possession, economic control, and personal sacrifice for its acquisition belong entirely to Mrs. Hazel, who, with her effort, built this asset for her family. The judge's voice resonated in the room, each word a hammer tearing down the lies. Therefore, this court nullifies any attempt of eviction or dispossession of the property by the defendants, Mrs. Jessica and Mr. Stephen. Mrs. Hazel has the full right to reside in what is, de facto and de jure, her legitimate home, without interference or threats of any kind. A collective sigh of relief was heard among those present, especially among the members of the elderly support organizations who had been following the case. Hazel's tears, which had been held back for so long, began to flow silently, warm, sliding down her time-marked cheeks. They were not tears of sadness, but of a profound liberation, of a justice that had been long in coming but had finally reached her, washing away years of pain and humiliation. But the judge was not finished. His voice grew deeper, and his gaze turned to Jessica and Stephen, who remained on the floor and hunched in his seat, respectively. Furthermore, this court recognizes the moral and psychological abuse suffered by Mrs. Hazel, the way she was treated, the public and private humiliations, the constant contempt, and the attempt to strip her of her dignity and her home are acts that this court strongly condemns. While not a criminal offense in this case, it is a grave moral failing that cannot and should not be ignored. Respect for our elders is a fundamental pillar of our society, and what has occurred here is a sad example of its violation. Jessica, still on the floor, lifted her head upon hearing the judge's words, her face disfigured by shame and rage. Stephen, his head still bowed, shrank even further into his seat, the weight of the moral condemnation falling upon him with all its force. The judge banged his gavel one last time, and the sharp sound resonated like the end of an era, a final stop to injustice. Case closed. Let justice be done. The room erupted in a murmur of voices. The reporters began to write frantically, and people rose from their seats, some applauding discreetly, others wiping away tears, moved by the outcome. Hazel, still seated, felt the weight of the decision. The house was hers. Her dignity had been restored. She looked at Aaron, her eyes filled with immense gratitude. The young lawyer smiled at her, her own eyes moist, and hugged her tightly. "We did it, Mrs. Hazel. We did it," she whispered in her ear, her voice choked with emotion. The news of the verdict spread like wildfire across social media and news outlets. Number Justice for Hazel became a victory cry, a symbol of hope for many elderly people suffering in silence in their own homes. Jessica was subjected to an even greater media onslaught. Her influencer image shattered, her followers abandoning her in droves, her name now associated with cruelty and hypocrisy. Stephen, for his part, became the face of shame, a son who had allowed his mother to be humiliated and dispossessed. Hazel, however, felt no resentment, only a deep exhaustion and a peace she hadn't experienced in years. The house was hers, yes, but the most valuable thing she had recovered was her voice, her story, her dignity. The trial of silence was over, and the truth, though painful, had brought with it the freedom and justice she so longed for. Hazel's life, after decades of invisibility, was finally beginning to shine with its own light, an example to all that the truth, sooner or later, always finds its way. That first night, after Aaron had left and the silence of the house settled around her, Hazel did not go to the utility room. Instead, she walked slowly through the living room, her hand trailing along the wall she had helped paint. She sat in the comfortable armchair that had been forbidden territory for 2 years. She made herself a cup of tea and didn't worry about the sound of the spoon clinking against the cup. Later, as she walked to her new bedroom, the master bedroom, her foot landed on the creaky floorboard near the kitchen. For 2 years, that sound had been a source of terror, a betrayal. Tonight, it was just the sound of a house settling. It was the sound of home. She stood there for a long moment, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the sigh of the wind outside. It was the same silence she had endured for years, but now it was not empty. It was filled with peace. The judge's ruling marked a before and after in Hazel's life. The house, which had once been a silent prison, a place of shadows and humiliations, was now her refuge, her sanctuary. The days following the trial were unusually calm. The reporters went away, and the media buzz died down, leaving Hazel in the peace she so craved. With the help of Aaron and anonymous donations that had poured in from everywhere, the house began to transform. The walls, once gray and neglected, received new coats of paint in warm, cheerful tones, like soft yellow and sky blue, giving it an air of freshness and welcome. The windows, which once seemed like sad eyes, now sported flower pots with vibrant colors, geraniums and petunias, that Hazel cared for diligently, watering them each morning with a smile. The small front garden, which had been overgrown with weeds, was cleared and now housed a pair of rose bushes that promised to bloom soon. The corner of the utility room, where she had slept and suffered so much, was cleaned out and transformed into a small sewing studio, with a large work table and a bright light that allowed her to see every detail of her embroidery. Hazel spent her days sewing, but this time not to survive, not out of obligation, but for pure pleasure. She made small embroideries of mountain and river landscapes, kitchen towels with cheerful fruit and flower designs, and rag dolls with smiling faces and colorful dresses that seemed to come to life. Each stitch was an act of healing, a way of weaving her new life, free from humiliation and silence, an expression of her soul that could finally flourish. Peace had returned to her heart, but the wound of the past, though scarred, left a mark, a reminder of what she had endured. One day, As Hazel was watering her flowers on the porch, humming an old tune, a car slowly pulled up in front of the house. It was Stephen. He got out of the vehicle, his face gaunt, his eyes swollen, and an expression of deep shame and remorse that contorted his features. He approached his mother with slow, hesitant steps, as if fearing her rejection, each step a weight on his conscience. "Mom," Stephen began, his voice barely a whisper, laden with guilt and pain. "I've come to ask for your forgiveness. Forgiveness for everything. For not defending you. For letting Jessica treat you that way. For not believing you when you needed me most. I was a coward, Mom. I know. There's no excuse for what I did, for what I allowed to happen to you in your own house. I was blinded by fear, by comfort, and I left you alone." Hazel looked him in the eyes. Those eyes that had once been those of an innocent child and now reflected the pain of a repentant man, a man who had lost his way. She listened in silence, without interrupting, without reproaches, only with the serene gaze of a mother who has suffered but still loves. Stephen continued to speak, pouring out all the words of remorse he had held back for years, tears streaming down his cheeks, a torrent of guilt. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, that what I did is unforgivable, but I'm begging you, Mom, let me try to fix things. Let me be the son I should have been from the beginning. I want to help you. I want you to know that I am truly sorry." Hazel looked at the man before her, seeing both the son she loved and the stranger who had watched her suffer. A long sigh escaped her, carrying with it the weight of unspoken grief. "You are asking me for forgiveness, Stephen," she began, her voice soft but unbreakable, like the threads she had worked with her entire life. "But forgiveness is not something I have to give you. It is something I have decided to give myself. For 2 years I carried the pain of your silence. It was a heavy stone. I forgive you to put that stone down. Not for you, but for me. I am done carrying it." She paused, letting the words settle in the space between them. "I will always be your mother, but the trust a son should have from his mother, that is a different house. And you let that one burn down. Rebuilding it is your work, not mine." Hazel's words show a wisdom that only comes from deep pain. She understands that forgiveness is a gift you give yourself, but trust must be earned all over again. With the legal battle won, and the past finally confronted, what does a new life, built on her own terms, actually look like for Hazel? Stephen lowered his head, understanding the meaning of her words. He knew that trust would take time to rebuild, if it ever could be fully restored. He said goodbye with an awkward hug, a hug that seemed more like a farewell than a reunion. And Hazel felt a pang of sadness watching her son leave, a man broken by his own decisions, a man who had lost much more than a house. The most awaited visit, however, was Caleb's. Every weekend, punctual as a clock, the boy would appear at Hazel's door, his face lit up with a smile that reached his eyes. He would run to hug his grandmother, his small arms wrapping around her with a force that filled her soul and brought back her joy. "Grandma, I missed you so much," Caleb would say, and those words were the balm for Hazel's heart, the true treasure of her life. They would spend hours together. Caleb would tell her about his adventures at school, his new drawings, his wildest dreams. Hazel would read him fairy tales and animal stories, teach him how to make knots with colorful threads, and bake his favorite cookies, the chocolate chip ones they ate in secret, like a little ritual. The house filled with children's laughter, with the innocence and love that Jessica had tried to eradicate, but that Caleb had kept alive. Caleb always brought a storybook, or a new drawing for his grandmother, a gift made with his own hands. They would sit on the porch in the afternoon sun, and Caleb would ask with curiosity, "And now, Grandma, what are you going to embroider?" Hazel would smile, her eyes shining with a new light, a light of hope and gratitude. "Life, my love. I'm going to embroider life, but without threads of sadness. I'm going to embroider the joy, the peace, and the love that you give me." Hazel's house, once a place of shadows and silence, had become a home filled with light, flowers, and the contagious laughter of a child. Hazel continued to sew, her expert hands moving with grace, but now each stitch was for her own happiness, for her recovered dignity, a silent testament to her victory. Hazel's life, after the storm, had found a new course, a river of peace and purpose that carried her forward. The house, filled with light and colors, was a reflection of her renewed soul, a canvas where she painted a new hope each day. Caleb's visits had become the pillar of her week, filling every corner with joy and the innocence she had missed so much. Hazel continued to sew. Her hands could not be still, always in motion, but now her embroidery was more than a necessity. They were an expression of her freedom, of her overflowing creativity. She made landscapes with colorful threads that seemed to come to life, flowers that looked real and seemed to give off a scent, and small portraits of animals that Caleb adored and collected. Each piece was unique, charged with the history of her effort and the dignity she had recovered, a little piece of her soul captured on fabric. One day, as Hazel was showing Aaron her latest works, a series of kitchen towels with fruit designs that looked freshly picked, the young lawyer had a brilliant idea. "Mrs. Hazel, your embroidery is beautiful. It's pure art. It has a soul. You should share it with the world. We could create a social media page, a place where people can see your work, your talent, your story, and maybe even buy it." Hazel was hesitant at first. She, a woman from another era, didn't understand much about those internet things, social media, and websites. Her world was the thread, the needle, the fabric. But Aaron insisted with her contagious enthusiasm and her eyes full of conviction. "Don't worry, I'll help you with everything. It will be a way for your voice to continue to reach far, for people to know that dignity always prevails, that beauty can be born from pain." Hazel, trusting Aaron completely, accepted the challenge. Thus was born Hazel's page on social media, a small virtual corner that would soon become a phenomenon. Aaron uploaded photos of her embroidery, each with a description that told a little about Hazel's inspiration. She also uploaded photos of the house with its new flowers and a simple video recorded with the lawyer's cell phone, with no big production, but full of authenticity. In the video, Hazel, sitting in her sewing corner, with a serene smile and her expert hands holding a hoop, said a few words that resonated in the hearts of thousands. "Thank you for not leaving me alone. Thank you for believing in me, for giving me a hand when I needed it most. Life taught me that sometimes dignity fits in a canvas bag, in a small embroidery made with love, and no one has the right to take that away from you, no matter how hard they try. My story is the story of many, and I hope it gives them strength." The video, so simple and so authentic, went viral in a matter of hours. People who already knew her story from the media were moved even more to see her so strong, so dignified, so full of peace and wisdom. Comments of support flooded the page. Messages of admiration, of gratitude, of solidarity. "Mrs. Hazel, you are an inspiration. Your art is as beautiful as your soul. Thank you for teaching us not to give up." And orders for her embroidery began to arrive from all over the country, and even from other countries, from people who wanted to have a piece of her history, of her art, in their homes. Hazel, with the tireless help of Aaron, became a small business owner, a recognized artist. Her embroidery, each piece with a bit of her soul and her story, sold quickly. The money she earned she used to improve her house even more, to buy more high-quality threads and fabrics, and to treat herself to small pleasures she couldn't afford before, like a new pair of comfortable shoes or a sweet that reminded her of her childhood. But the most important thing was the connection she felt with all those people who supported her, who saw in her an example of strength and resilience, a voice for those who had none. Her story, which had begun with a push and humiliation, had transformed into a beacon of hope, a testament that kindness and truth always find their way. And so, Hazel not only reclaimed her house but also found her voice, turning pain and silence into an inspiring embroidery art business that touched the hearts of thousands. She proved that true dignity and strength are sometimes the most quietly kept. Her story can make many people reflect on their own lives, on the times they might feel invisible, when their personal sacrifices are overlooked by the very people they love most. Everyone has their own silent battles. The story is also a reminder of the importance of taking the time to check in on the elders that each person cherishes. And it is a message that those who believe in the value of listening to and sharing stories like this can subscribe to the channel so they do not miss the meaningful stories to come.